Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer of the IADA Symposium 2025 and all the attendees. My name is Melissa Gianferrari. I have been working in paper and photo conservation since 2002, and I am currently a professor of photo conservation at the Academy of Fine Arts in Bologna. My colleague Chiara Zironi, who will speak after me, is a photo, paper and book conservator and a conservation scientist. For the scientific analysis on the artwork discussed in this presentation, she collaborated with the conservation scientist Davide Bussolari. Our work was conducted within the framework of the project Strategia Fotografia, a ministerial project dedicated to the comprehensive study of the Luigi Ghirri archive and the conservation of the artist's mixed media works, which enable the recovery of unique pieces from the Ghirri Fund preserved at the CSAC of the University of Parma. These include the compositive artwork Infinito from 1974, which will be discussed in this presentation, the two Leporello's slot machine and kilometer 0.250, and the two portfolios Colazione sull'erba and Paesaggi di cartone, all created with mixed materials. The remaining portion of the fund, containing more than 1,600 artworks, underwent comprehensive documentation and detailed deterioration analysis. The cataloging process involved two phases. First, a systematic survey recording descriptive data such as dimensions, materials, surface coatings, and any original in-paintings. Second, an assessment of the materials and an evaluation of how differential aging processes might affect the long-term preservation of the artworks. This investigation revealed significant disparities between prints from Ghirri's early production phase, the 1970s and early 1980s, and those from his later career, particularly the late 80s and early 90s. Luigi Ghirri was an important Italian photographer of the 20th century who did not follow traditional academic training, but instead pursued his own personal journey, creating his own space for research. His artistic approach does not view an image as a single entity, but rather seeks to construct and design entire, complex works that unfold through sequences of images. He began his photographic work in 1968, collaborating with conceptual artists, and became one of the few Italian experimental photographers to use color photography for his images of interiors and landscapes during this period. He passed away prematurely in 1992. Ghirri was known for his meticulous use of mixed materials, his attention to detail and his craftsmanship. The mounting process became an essential part of his creative approach. However, many of the heterogeneous materials he employed in this photographic composition were not designed for long-term preservation. This was largely due to limited awareness in Italy during the 70s regarding the degradation of such materials. Examples include presso-sensitive tapes, adhesives, highly acidic boards, hardware, and other unsuitable cardboard supports. We can recall some of his significant series, such as Weekend Atlante from 1973 and Kodachrome 1970-1978, where the prints are adhered using various methods to secondary supports and mixed media objects such as portfolios made of hardboard, plywood, cardboard with specific adhesive and tapes alongside the C prints photographics themselves. The portfolios such as Paesaggi di cartone and Colazione sull'erba, dating back to the 70s and early 80s, are complemented by leporellos from the same period. The leporellos consist of the C prints mounted on black or white paper with insert of canvas and other materials, arranged in accordion format. Currently, a large part of the Ghirri collection, consisting of around 1,600 multi-material photographic objects, is housed at the CSAC, while the original negatives are preserved at the Panizzi Library, Reggio Emilia. Other works by the artist are held by his heirs, also in Reggio Emilia. The material preserved at the CSAC are housed in folders and boxes made of conservation-grade materials and stored in a deposit with a controlled temperature and humidity. The collection consists primarily of chromogenic prints, many of which are mounted on medium or large format cardboard as part of portfolios, maquettes, leporellos, and other photographic compositions. From a materials perspective, chromogenic prints are considered inherently unstable. Even after several decades, and despite being stored under appropriate conditions, they may exhibit discoloration of the image layer. Another distinctive aspect of the artist's practice was his method of producing photographs over extended periods, sometimes years, which would ultimately be assembled into a single photographic project. Consequently, the timeline of a photographic project was not necessarily aligned with a single concentrated production phase. Infinito is a large format work consisting of 365 C-print photographs of the sky, created over the course of the 1 year. Most of the photographs were printed by the same photographic laboratory and then stored in the archive of the Centro Studi Archivio e Comunicazione in Parma, under controlled temperature and relative humidity, yet they exhibit varying degrees of discoloration. The work Infinito, in its entirety, was exhibited only for a few weeks in 1979 in Parma, during the retrospective Luigi Ghirri Vera Fotografia. That could be considered one of the rare site-specific installations by this renowned photographer. After the exhibition, the dismantled work was stored in the Climate Control Archive storage of CSAC, alongside the other 600 masterpieces that were donated by the artist. Infinito is made up of 12 rectangular panels of coated cardboard with 365 C-print photographs, approximately 14 per 8 cm, regularly distributed, even though the number varies depending on the size of each panels. The number from 1 to 12 are written in pencil on the reverse side of each panel, corresponding to the original assembly sequence. On the 12th panel, there is a framework conceived by the artist. The method of mounting the photographs and materials on the panels is attributed to Ghirri himself and does not seem to follow a precise or repetitive scheme, highlighting the artist's modus operandi and his creative process. We use panel number 1 as an example. We can see some photographs with a glossy finish, some with semi-matte finish. They also could be mounted with glue on the left and right edges, on the four corners, on the top and bottom edges, or on the four edges. I now hand it over to my colleague Chiara Zironi.
Good morning to all. As previously introduced by Melissa, Infinito can be considered one of the most important works of the artist and also maybe the more problematic and difficult one to interpret from a conservation point of view. As you can see from the picture, the artwork has undergone a degradation that is not entirely homogeneous, even though it has always shared the same conservation environment at constant and suitable parameters of temperature and humidity. The first issue was that we didn't know the original appearance of the artwork, because there were no photos of the 1979 exhibition. However, researching the CSAC archives reveals a slide from 1992 that showed a significant alteration in the artwork's color. Despite the passage of almost 2 decades since its genesis, the color fading was not as evident in 1992. For this reason, from now on, I will talk about our project based on our understanding of the reasons that led Infinito to this state of conservation and our improvement in the documentation of the artwork, continuing the one started in 1992 and adding some new elements derived from further analysis. First of all, it is important to mention the potential causes of this phenomenon, which include the natural decay of the cyan layer of chromogenic photograph, the process of deterioration of the materials from which the artwork is composed, the possible different printing techniques, the different photographic papers, the different printers, and so on. So, regarding the state of conservation, it was immediately clear that the panels were oxidated with a foxing degradation and a lot of the age cracks. On the back, there were deep abrasion of the surface layer and paper strips applied on it, likely related to the disassembling of the panels from a larger surface. On the front, the photographs were in a poor state of preservation with a lot of different kinds of dust on the surface, which probably dated back to before the 1979 installation. For example, there were paw prints of the Ghirri's cat on the surface. As anticipated, they all show a slight to high tendency to color fading, and on almost all of them, there were yellow stains caused by the oxidation of the adhesive applied on the back. There were traces of the adhesive used for mounting the photographs. In many cases, the adhesive was still sticky enough to have incorporated a lot of dust. The photographs were thus characterized by slight flaking at the corners and by the lifting of the photographic layer. These are part of the conservation issues found as visible documentation, but they do not fully justify the presence of this obvious decay. To understand more about the artwork and to produce a proper condition report, we decided to use the UV fluorescence as a diagnostic imaging. As we all know, this technique is widely used in the field of art conservation and fits among the most common non-destructive diagnostics exams. In this case, our main topic was to highlight the differences between the materials used by the author. We decided to proceed in this way because we had a limited budget and we needed to use a diagnostic technique that could give us an overview of the entire work, so every 365 photos, and not just of only some punctual areas. However, any further analysis can be always performed starting from this preliminary study. So after this visible screening, the UV fluorescence helped us to detect some hidden details. We can see from the picture that the artwork shows two different reactions to fluorescence, one lighter and one darker. The clearer ones correspond to the least chromatically degraded photographs, while the darker ones to the most degraded. After a first study, starting from the observation in visible light, the only thing all the photographs with high fluorescence had in common was a semi-matte finish. However, this finish is not exclusive to these photographs, but can be found on other photographs ascribed to the group with dark fluorescence, which tend to have a glossy finish. What clearly distinguishes these two categories of photographs is the presence of a dense dotted network being similar to a spray varnish on the less fluorescent one, while the more fluorescent photographs appear to have been subject to an additional varnish, in this case applied with a brush or roller, since horizontal strokes are visible. Another aspect to be taken into consideration is the presence of stains and fingerprints that appear dark on the fluorescent photographs, as they thin the varnish. This still testifies to the fact that fluorescence is mainly generated by the finish rather than by the type of paper or the printing mode. It follows that where this varnish is lacking or where it is thinned, the fluorescence response decreases dramatically, bringing the brightness level to that typical of untreated prints. It cannot be ruled out that all the artworks photographs were treated with a spray varnish and only some were later reprocessed with other liquid varnish. This finding can be partially corroborated by a case in which on the photographs with marked fluorescence there are signs of a drip, causing the finish to be removed, leaving on the dark portion a glimpse of the spray varnish. These considerations then today are only supposition of the creative process of the photographer, which would require specific investigation, but which in our case confirm the presence of a different treatment on the photographs. A treatment that also changed their color aging, thus justifying the current appearance of the work. In summary, the use of UV fluorescence allowed us to understand that there are two types of surface treatment, one with a dotted network and the second one probably applied with a brush or a roller. And this second treatment provided a better protection to the aging. Therefore, fluorescence analysis helped us to prepare a condition report suitable for the start of restoration work. The analysis indeed has highlighted more clearly the presence of the adhesives residues on some photographs that were difficult to discern in visible light. Identifying the adhesives allowed us to an easier and localized removal during the restoration, being able to recognize adhesives with the same nature without a specific solubility test on the photographs. In addition, fluorescence made it possible to detect the presence of original retouches visible as dark spots. This was important to the cleaning of the surface, respectful of the original retouches without removing them. These are some examples of the adhesive removal before and after restoration. And in conclusion, Infinito is an artwork that shows why preventive and periodic documentation of chromogenic photography is extremely important, as alterations in these materials are often unpredictable, starting with the printing and finishing methods used by the photographer himself. For this reason, it is difficult to make a long-term prediction. to understand firstly if the chromatic decay of the more magentated photographs is decelerating or if they will deteriorate more and more until they become completely red. Secondly, if the less magentated photographs will also deteriorate drastically or in a few years. And finally, if the differences between one group of photographs and the others will become more pronounced or more balanced. Nowadays, the digital is advancing, but it is very important to keep track of the current situation of chromogenic prints, updating the status quo as much as possible. It is only through periodic checking that differences in color rendering can be detected. As far as Infinito is concerned, a data collection campaign was approved by CSAC, which involved the acquisition of the percentage of color by a color detector tool on some photographs. In order to perform the measurement always on the same point, we built an appropriate mask to be applied on the photographs, and we acquired a total of 10 values, which a weighted average was made on the percentage of the RGB channels, attributing to each color a universally recognized numerical value. In this way, an attempt was made to keep the average of the measure values under control. Should the values begin to vary greatly, then a new photo acquisition campaign may be necessary to assess the variation. Thank you for your attention.